Welcome to the Genealogy Gems podcast, providing quick and innovative ways to make the absolute most out of your research time and creative ideas for sharing and displaying your family history. I'm your host, Louise Cooke. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 54 of the Genealogy Gems podcast. Well, I am just going to start right out by saying I am very excited this week because I just launched my brand new podcast that I've been working on for a lot of weeks now. It is called Family History, Genealogy Made Easy. This is something I have been wanting to do for quite some time. And the new show captures two areas of focus that are sort of outside of the focus of this show. First, I wanted to do a show that anybody could stumble upon and with absolutely no prior experience in genealogy be able to listen to and enjoy, and that would walk them step by step through the process of doing family history research. It's kind of like a long-term free seminar that you can listen to and work along with. Now, as time goes on, we'll move into more advanced topics, but because podcasts are pre-recorded and can be made available indefinitely, anybody who comes across the show can start from the beginning and get going right away. So if you have a friend or a group that is interested but not sure how to get going, or if you've been teaching a beginning class, this podcast would be a terrific complement to that. Just send them the link to the show, and you will give them everything that they need to learn on how to research their family tree. Now, the other area that I have wanted to focus on is success stories and words of wisdom from experienced genealogists. As I travel around going to conferences and as I read my email, I hear so many great stories. Some are motivating, some are inspiring, some are heartwarming, and some offer just excellent advice for not making the same mistakes that they did. I wanted to have a show where I could really showcase these stories and the wisdom of experienced genealogists. And these just seem to dovetail perfectly with the sort of Genealogy 101 portion of the show that I was just telling you about. I think they go together really well. Newbies to genealogy will get a sense of what they can look forward to, and more experienced genealogists, like you guys, can enjoy hearing personal stories from those that you've probably heard of in the world of genealogy. It may be just what you need to help you through a brick wall, or to gain new momentum in your research, or just enjoy sharing in the camaraderie of hearing from your fellow researchers. So that's what you'll find at Family History, Genealogy Made Easy. Personal conversations and stories from the experts, and a genealogy how-to course all wrapped up in one. Now, why did I pick the name Genealogy Made Easy? It's not that genealogy is easy. It's that my goal with this show is that we're going to remove the roadblocks to getting going and staying motivated in your research. Everyone is short on time. I mean, we know we're all really busy. And at almost every genealogy meeting I attend each month, I hear at least one person say, "Oh, maybe this month I'll get back into my research." I can almost guarantee that after listening to a weekly half-hour episode that you can listen to during your lunch break, you'll be making room on that calendar of yours and making dates with yourself to get back to the research that you love. So I really hope that all of you, no matter what experience level you're at in genealogy, will subscribe to the new show this week. And as I said, it's a weekly half-hour show, and you can find it in iTunes right alongside the Genealogy Gems podcast. Just search for Family History or Genealogy, or you can follow the link that I'll have for you in the show notes for this episode. And I'm really counting on hearing from you guys in the coming weeks. I'd love to hear your suggestions and your comments. And if you have a heartwarming or a unique genealogical story that you'd like to share on an upcoming episode of Family History, Genealogy Made Easy, call me and leave a brief message on the voicemail line. That's 925-272-4021, and include your email address, and I may just get in touch with you about that. And if you really like the show, which I hope you will, I'd like to ask again for your help with iTunes reviews. Last year, you guys were all wonderful about leaving positive 5-star reviews in iTunes for the Genealogy Gems podcast, which really helps new listeners decide whether or not they're going to try a show out and listen to it. So if you could take a moment, even while you're just listening to that first episode, and leave a 5-star review in iTunes, that would be terrific. I really appreciate it. I especially want to make sure that the non-genealogist who happens to come across the show in iTunes will be motivated by seeing your reviews to give it a listen and maybe just start doing their own research. Wouldn't that be cool? So the new show has kept me extra busy this week, but as always, I love getting to the microphone and talking with all of you on the Genealogy Gems podcast, because this is kind of my baby. Oh, and I wanted to warn you guys. Okay. There was a new Flash player that came out this week. I don't know about you, but I got a prompt on my computers to do an upgrade. Well, I'm on a PC, so I loaded the newest Flash player, which I think does HD and stuff like that, maybe like a widescreen or something. And I did it, and now I'm finding that lots of players and buttons around the internet don't work for me anymore on my computers. So you might want to hold off on installing the new Flash player until these websites have the chance to upgrade their players. I'm not quite sure how this works, but I'm even having a problem. I can't see the little click to play button on my own genealogygems.tv website. So if you're having trouble seeing those, it may be because of the new Flash player. So I'm going to be working on that this week and trying to talk with the folks at Adobe and figure out what's going on with that. So that's what's new from here. So let's hear from you, and we will do that at the mailbox. I have an email here from Michael in Southern California, who writes, I was listening to podcast number 50 and the losses that families had from that tragic time, and he's referring to the 1918 Spanish flu epidemic. He says, my wife also lost an aunt in that epidemic. Her grandfather was left with a 1-year-old son. And here's an interesting fact that came up in an article that I read last year. It stated that unlike most flus that attack the very young and the very old, the Spanish flu was worse on those who were in their prime and healthy. Thus, the one lady that had the handwriting analysis being done that identified her having a robust and vigorous constitution, it really matched up with those who were hit the hardest. Well, that's so true, Michael. Thank you so much for writing. And Midge from Massachusetts wrote me in Facebook to say that she subscribed to the podcast in iTunes after reading about it in Family Tree Magazine's e-newsletter. And she says, I thought I'd listen to it while I was scrapbooking this afternoon. Hey, that's a great idea, Midge. You know, every time I record an episode, I listen to it all the way through to make sure that it sounds right. And I usually do that while I'm ironing. But I think scrapbooking sounds like a lot more fun. So I may be doing that. Now, we are off to our first gem, which has helped a lot of folks put some cash in their pocket.
Profile America, Sunday, November 2nd. A sound that was familiar to many generations of Americans was first heard this week in 1879. That's when James Ritty, a saloon keeper in Dayton, Ohio, invented the cash register. The invention soon replaced the open cash drawer, which gave business owners no record of their sales, and the tempting money often disappeared without a trace. For 100 years or more, retail transactions across the nation were rung up by a cash register. At first cranked by hand, then electrically powered, with dollars and cents figures popping up mechanically in a window so customers could see what they owed. Today, ornate brass cash registers are a hot item in antique stores, and barcode scanners now ring up America's retail sales of $3.7 trillion a year. Profile America is in its 12th year as a public service of the U.S. Census Bureau.
Okay, well, I'm here at the FGS conference, and I'm talking with Colleen Fitzpatrick, a name you would certainly know from her Forensic Genealogy book, which is a really popular book and one of my favorites. But, Colleen, you were just talking to me, and I wanted to have you share with the audience a little bit about some of the really fascinating work that you've been doing lately that kind of falls into the forensic genealogy category, but certainly goes way beyond that. Tell us a little bit about what you've been up to.
Well, because of the books, I was contacted on my website by an investor who was working on unclaimed property. And he had a number of addresses all over the world for people that, for example, would have a lot in the middle of a development, or they'd have unclaimed property in some state, and he would get a commission for locating the person that owned that property. I never really figured out that end of it so much. And so he would give me, I started working for him, he would give me names and addresses all over the world, and sometimes 20, 30 years old, and my job was to find that person or their next of kin. And I found out I had the touch for it. And I was going to give you an example of one guy. The address was in Toronto, and it was about 20 years old. And in the end, I found out that this man had died, but I found his widow living in a small town in Estonia, and I got her phone number in Estonia for him. And in another case, my favorite, I found a bag lady living on the streets of Buenos Aires. She had been married to a very wealthy man, and when he died, the family disowned her because she wasn't educated, and they thought maybe she may have been a gold digger. I don't know that part. So she was wound up on the streets. She had been on the streets for 15 years. She was 68 years old. She picked up cardboard at night for a living. She lived in an apartment without water, without heat, telephone, electricity. And so I found her because she still had that one lot in Florida that she inherited that nobody knew anything about.
Oh, my gosh.
And so, that was a real challenge, but it was great to find her and, turn over that name. Fortunately, she didn't have a phone number, but we worked on that, and we kind of got her in touch with the investor anyway.
Well, so maybe she turned out to be a little bit better off than she thought she was, but she owned the property?
She was the heir to it because her husband had died, and she and her husband had bought it jointly. So the problem with that is, actually, I think that she probably gave the land away, because if she kept it and she owned it, then the family was powerful. They could have had her killed, and then they would own it. They would inherit it. On the other hand, if she sold it for a lot of money to the investor, then she'd have a lot of money on the streets. She probably didn't have a bank account, and she could have been killed. So in the long run, I really believe that she probably gave it away, and I never know the end of the story, and that was probably the best for everybody.
Right. Now, you were telling me about another really interesting story that you got involved with the search of a World War II pilot. Is that right?
No, actually, it was a merchant marine.
Oh, merchant marine.
There was a plane crash in Alaska in 1948. The plane crashed carrying 30 merchant marines, 24 passengers and 6 crew members, and they were returning from delivering oil around the world for a year, and they were flying from Shanghai, China to LaGuardia Airfield in New York when the plane impacted Mount Sanford at 11,000 feet. This is 200 miles northeast of Anchorage in a very remote area of the Wrangell Mountain Range. So even though the officials flew over the site and they looked at it, nobody really could do anything to recover anything of the crash. And within a day or so, it was covered by snow, so there was no point. Well, in the 1990s, 2 pilots who were friends, one flies for Northwest Airlines and one flies for Delta, they decided to go hiking and camping and find this plane crash because that was their hobby.
Oh, right.
And they knew the story. They had flown that route many times. So they went up a few years in a row and never had any success. And it was very physically taxing, expensive to do this. So right when they're coming out, they quit, they give up. There they find the plane crash. They find the debris field in the middle of the glacier. So they went home, and they came back 2 years later, and when they came back, they found not only the debris field again, which was all different because of the glacier, they found a frozen human arm and hand laying on top of the snow that had just been churned up, since they had been there before.
It's amazing.
So this started 9 years of trying to identify which one of those 30 people it belonged to. And the connection here is that I was contacted in May 2007 by Terry Barton, who helps administer a lot of small DNA studies. he had been contacted by the Armed Forces DNA Lab because they had a partial DNA match with somebody in one of the online databases. And Terry was kind of concerned about putting people in touch with each other with the question of privacy and things like that.
Right.
And so he contacted me to ask my opinion on whether, it was right to put people in touch. And of course I said, look, this is a serviceman, do everything you can for him. And I said, by the way, I find people for a living. Why don't you tell me the whole story and let me see if I can help out here. Well, by then AFDL had eliminated 25 people. This was 26. And this man died. He was 21 years old, and he was a cook on the oil tanker. And AFDL had worked for months trying to find anybody, any relative, any trace of his family in the records, and they couldn't do it. So they had started other ways of trying to identify him in backwards mode. In other words, see if his DNA matches somebody in the online database, and maybe that's the family. Well, it turned out that I said, look, I do this for a living. Send me all the information. Let me see what I can do. I was actually in Guatemala at the time, and I found the family within an hour.
Oh, wow.
So I notified AFDL, and from then on I worked for him, to the end of the project. And finally, as of last September, we had eliminated 28 people, and we had 2 more left. And there was a thought that maybe we would get to the end and not have an answer, because number one, we suspected that there may have been somebody else on the plane, not on the manifest, like a CIA agent, or I think at that time it was called OSS. So, and then again, one of the people who had given a DNA sample may have, not given their own sample. They may have let their mother send it in, or their father, or their friend. So there was a number of reasons why, when we got to 28, we were all holding our breath to see what would happen.
Yeah.
And then 29 was a man born in Vermont in 1911. His mother was an Irish immigrant. And so it took an act of God to find out where she was from in Ireland. Oh. I'm not kidding. One piece of paper in Vermont, just one piece of paper, 20 years after she died, her son got married, and he said that she came from County Limerick.
Oh, what a blessing to find that.
And that was a real breakthrough. And then in researching County Limerick, I did come up with a number of Margaret Conways, that was her name, that could have been her, because, I looked in the Irish birth registration. She was born in the 1870s, so it was likely her birth had been registered since it starts in 1864. So I had 6 Margaret Conways that were possible. And meantime, the other genealogists had made progress on this man we were investigating, Frank Van Zandt, on the Van Zandt side of the family in upstate New York. And so the Van Zandts, some of the older ones, remembered the Conways and gave us a list of the siblings of Margaret Conway. And apparently there were 6 brothers and sisters that had all come over together. Well, I checked those 6 against the list that I had, and none of my Margaret Conways matched. So it turned out that, of all the possibilities, it turned out she lied about her age. I'm sure she's the only woman that has ever done that.
Yeah, exactly.
And I was able to find her birth record. She was the daughter, the 5th of 10 children of John Conway and Ellen Drum. And 4 of the brothers and sisters, Michael, Lizzie, Ann, and Catherine, had remained behind in Ireland. So after we had traced all the family in upstate New York, and there were no descendants along the direct female line we could use, we had to investigate Ireland. And so I started a systematic search for not the Conway family, but for the Drum family, because Drum is such an odd name. And I found that this family was probably extinct in the area. So I started calling all the Conways, and in the end of it was I talked to a woman named Mary Conway who said her husband was dead, but that his brother, Morris Conway, might know something about the family. And she gave me his unlisted cell phone number.
Oh, wow.
So I called Morris, and he asked me, he took it all in, and he asked me, let him think about it. Please call the next day. And there's more details, but I'm skipping a lot of it here. And so I did. And so he said, Morris, I was pretty well determined that he didn't recognize any of the names, and I knew that this person was the very last person I could ever call, and either he was going to help me or it was all over. So he said, I was holding out on you. I'm actually the keeper of the Conway Cemetery across the street from my house.
Oh my gosh.
And he said, I wasn't sure, but I wanted to go check a tombstone in that cemetery. Let me read it to you. And it said, erected by John Conway to the memory of his dear father and mother who died in 1853 at the age of 53 years. Also his wife Ellen and her 2 children, Michael and Lizzie. And that was Margaret Conway's father erecting the stone to Margaret's mother and her brother, sister, and her grandparents. So that was the dead side of the family. Now that's the Conways. I needed to find the drums. That's the mother's line, and that's the way you do mitochondrial DNA. Mitochondria is really what you use for identifying remains. So I said, Morris, really we need to find the drums now. Do you know anything? Help us. Any drum, any history, anything. He said, well, my name is Morris Conway. My mother's name was Kathleen McNamee. My grandmother's name was Bridget Sheehy. My great-grandmother's name was Ann O'Shea, and I think my great-great-grandmother's last name was Drum. And I said, do you know that, or is that just your intuition? He says, it's my intuition. And so we had him tested mitochondria, and in fact, his great-great-grandmother was Elizabeth Drum, who was Ellen Drum's sister. And so that was the female line, and we were able to identify the remains by mitochondria through Morris Conway. And then afterwards we said, well, he's Morris Conway. What's the relation of Margaret Conway? Margaret had a brother who had come and had descendants in upstate New York. So we had him Y-tested, and Morris matched the Conways as well. So he was a double cousin to the man that died. So we were able to make a double DNA match, plus, in the meantime, fingerprint experts from the FBI and the state of Virginia jumped in, and also George Washington University, and they made the oldest fingerprint identification that has ever been made by creating ways to get the fingerprints off that now 60-year-old hand that had been embalmed and mummified against Merchant Marine records at the center in Virginia.
And they had the fingerprint records?
They had searched for 10 years, almost 10 years, for those fingerprint records, and many of them were just not available. And so as a last-ditch effort, they went over to the center one last time to say, do you have any more of these? We have only a few people left. And in fact, Frank Van Zandt had been ruled out by earlier fingerprint that were taken in Alaska very early on that were absolutely terrible. But he had been ruled out. But for some reason they said, oh, these fingerprints are kind of unclear. Let's rule him back in. And they did. And they went over to the center, in the Maritime Center, and there was a new archivist that said, oh, you guys are looking for those fingerprints? Oh, okay, here they are. They're right here on the shelf. Why didn't you tell me? And it was one of those situations. Yeah. And they actually had it, and they made the oldest fingerprint identification with the hand against those Merchant Marine records that had been, misplaced for so many years.
How amazing that if you will, the body part that was found not only provided the DNA but had the fingerprint option. What an amazing story of a combination of DNA evidence, but it would have virtually been useless without the genealogical evidence that drew you to who in the world do you test. It's Correct. Not like you can just run a test and a name pops up. Yeah. It's that combination that makes it so powerful.
Correct. And the miracle was finding, I tell you, I turned over every piece of paper in the state of Vermont. I wasn't going to give up. And the miracle was finding that one word on one piece of paper somewhere in Vermont that said, actually it said Timrick, Ireland. But that's where the recognition and the art comes in, because you never get exactly what you're looking for. You get like something slightly different. And being experienced in Irish genealogy, I knew it was Limerick. And that was the first thing. And the second one is being persistent and getting Morris's unlisted cell phone number. Somehow a miracle happened there, and the rest is history.
Looking for a way to get even more genealogy gems that will power boost your research, inspire your creativity, and give you the motivation you need to tackle that brick wall? Become a Genealogy Gems premium member and start reaping the benefits right away. And by entering the coupon code SAVE20, you can get 20% off the annual membership. If you enjoy the Genealogy Gems podcast, then you're going to love being a Genealogy Gems premium member. But don't just take my word for it. Here's what your fellow Genealogy Gems podcast listeners have to say.
Thanks again for everything that you do and for bringing things into a new perspective.
I'm calling because I wanted to tell you how much I enjoyed episode number 4. Thanks.
Thank you, Lisa. I learned so much from your podcast and look forward to each new episode.
To become a premium member and start reaping the benefits right away, go to www.genealogygems.tv and click the Join Today button. Be sure and type in the special coupon code SAVE20 and you'll get 20% off the annual membership. Don't drive through your research with the handbrake on. Go full throttle by being a Genealogy Gems premium member. The other day, I was perusing Facebook. I noticed some beautiful photographs on Lee Drew's page. And they were of several women all standing together holding up various colorful quilts. And I sensed there was a story behind these quilts, and I asked him to share it with me. And the story behind these photos is full of great ideas for all of us for creating family traditions and family heirlooms. And as I tell you about these quilts, I hope that you will head to the show notes for this episode 54 so that you can see them for yourself. Now, Lee's wife, Connie, taught all of the ladies in their family how to sew and quilt and do a wide range of needlework skills. And Lee told me that if a project has a sewing needle of any size or kind involved, they are up for it. Well, these ladies came up with a wonderful way to enjoy their crafting together while creating the family heirlooms of the future. And they started what is known as Sisters Quilts. Each lady creates the first square or row of her quilt, which sets the color scheme, and then she sends it off to the next lady. At that point, the pattern is wide open to the interpretation of the next sister in the round robin and so on. Each person in rotation adds a square or a row and then sends it on to the next at the first of the next month. The packages cross each other in the mail so no one sees the other quilts other than its status when it left their hands. And Lee says that's the really fun part of this whole adventure. The designs are comprised of the creativity and the colors of each person with no outside input or chatting with each other about what they're going to be doing with them. And each lady gets a very unique quilt in the end that was created especially for them by their sisters, with each contributing their own personal talents and artistic skills. Isn't that just a wonderful idea? Well, Lee says that they have a family reunion every 4th of July, and the last person with each quilt brings it to the gathering where they present it to the originator of the quilt. As you can imagine, there is a lot of anticipation leading up to that ceremony, which is watched by the rest of the clan. Now, being the creative seamstress that she is, Connie Drew also found a way to use old worn-out quilts that were being burned or thrown away that were made by her grand and her great-grandmothers to create more family heirlooms. Many of the quilts were so worn out that only 8 or 10 squares survived. So Connie just cut the worn-out quilts into individual pieces, and she put them into quilted frames. And then she added a plain backing that included the story of that particular quilt. So each daughter was given one of the frame squares from each of their ancestors' worn and discarded quilts. But she didn't stop there. Last year, she created a family tree wall hanging for each of their children's families as Christmas gifts. Lee and Connie took silhouette photographs, and you know I love silhouettes. They took them of each family member, and Lee reduced them to size to fit on Connie's pattern. And she used the photocopies as patterns for the cloth silhouettes of all their family members. Each of them has a unique design with colors and design patterns to fit the personalities of their daughters and the colors that they use in their homes. Now the family tree wall hangings adorn the walls and the homes of their children as conversation centerpieces. Lee then asked Connie to make one for their family and descendants as his Christmas present. After drawing the shape of the tree that they liked, Connie went to work. Using the silhouette photos yet again, he resized them to fit on their tree. Lee said that other than asking for a few color tweaks, he just stayed out of the way at that point. And on Christmas morning, he received his own family tree wall hanging. It has room left on it for the yet-to-be-born grandchildren that will be added as they come along. And a big congratulations to Connie and Lee because they have 3 more nuts, as he calls them, that are going to be coming that will adorn the branches of the tree by early of spring 2009. And lastly, he says that Connie has made fancy quilted vests for their daughters when they were in grade school that were their favorite pieces of clothing. Each girl has kept the vest through the years, and now their daughters wear them. However, Grandma decided that both the granddaughters and the grandsons needed their own grandma vests, and so each granddaughter now has a unique, fancy quilted vest, and each grandson has a vest and a hat. And of course, each item has a "Made with Love" by Grandma Connie Drew label sewn inside. And that just reminded me so much of my childhood and growing up because my mother being a quilter, she also made vests. And I remember one year she made them for Valentine's Day. So they were kind of, Valentine themed. I think they were like a log cabin quilt vest. And those are precious. I mean, you have to hang on to those things and pass them on. Finally, Lee wrote that seeing my own love for quilts, which he saw some of my photos on the show and in my Facebook page, he says, "You know how precious these handmade creations will be to our descendants throughout the generations." And so it goes, passing on skills, love, and enjoyment across the generations through the use of sewing needles. Well, I've got to say, Connie just has a super terrific husband, don't you think, ladies? I mean, he appreciates her quilting. He encourages her in it, and I just think that's wonderful. What a precious gift to all of the members of their family. So let's recap some of the great ideas offered up here by Lee Drew, many of which obviously come from his wife, Connie. First off, he mentions the sisters' quilts. Round up your relatives from the neighborhood or around the country and start a tradition that will create lasting heirlooms. If you don't have a lot of quilters in your family, how about doing cross-stitch or scrapbooking pages? Be creative and just come up with what works for you. Number 2, he talked about creating a family tree wall hanging. And there are so many mediums that you could use for this. Quilting, applique, again, cross-stitch, or painting. The options are really limitless. And I love how Connie incorporated family silhouettes into the tree. And finally, third, create unique heirloom clothing. Now, are you not artistic or handy with a needle? And I know some of you say that you're not. Well, how about creating custom shirts on a website like Cafe Press? Just upload your photos and add text if you like. How about a shirt for each person with the photo of the ancestor on it that they remind you of most? And you could still sew a little tag in the back that says "Created with Love from Grandma," like Connie did. Well, whether you're really artsy or you don't have a creative bone in your body, there's a project out there for you that will allow you to express yourself and promote lasting family traditions. So go to the show notes, check out the wonderful photos of their quilts, and I'll have links for you to the Cafe Press website, so you can take that kind of route if you'd like to. And also I'll have a link to a previous episode I did on Heritage Quilts, episode 39, as well as my video, which is called Genealogy Gems Presents Heritage Quilts. In today's MacGenealogist Minute with Ben Sayer, Ben's going to continue his reviews of genealogy software for the Macintosh computer with a review of MacFamily Tree.
Hi, I'm Ben Sayer from MacGenealogist.com. This time I want to tell you about a Macintosh genealogy database application called MacFamily Tree. It's from a company called Synium. It's a German company. If you want to go to their website, it's www.synium.de. And Synium spelled S-Y-N-I-U-M. The first thing I've got to say about MacFamily Tree is that the displays, the graphics, and the entry screens are just gorgeous. These guys have obviously spent a lot of time and put a lot of effort into making this application just look stunning, and they've succeeded in that. The interface is entry screen based, so you'll get a screen for each type of thing that you want to enter in, whether it's a person or an event or source. And it has a navigation bar at the top that makes it really simple to move around within there between those screens. Moving around between people and families is simple in this application as well. That's basically done through lists. So anytime you select a report or a chart or something that you need to focus on a specific individual or specific family, you're presented with a screen that lists all those families or all the people that you can choose from. So that makes it simple. One can also navigate between people through a graphics screen, a chart basically, that is called Family Assistant, and that's basically a very small localized ancestor diagram. But like everything in MacFamily Tree, it's a very pretty interface. It's got some moving auras around the selected person, all that. You really just have to see it. Speaking of seeing it, there are some video demos on the Cinium site, so I really do encourage you to go check those out. Even if you're not shopping for a genealogy application on the Mac right now, it's just something that you should see. And speaking of something to see, there's a virtual tree feature within MacFamily Tree that's basically a three-dimensional view of ancestors and descendants all in one chart. The virtual tree allows you to rotate in 3 dimensions and zoom in and out to see various things and select people in that tree. There's another really neat graphical feature in here called the virtual globe. You see the Earth presented with little dots across the surface of the globe for different events, and then lines connecting them together that indicate that these are events all related to one person. Unfortunately, there's no way to tell MacFamily Tree that you only want to see events for a certain person. One of the other things I really like about MacFamily Tree is its tight integration with other things. It's integrated very well with the iPhone, so one can, if you have an iPhone, take your data with you by using their little app that's available through the App Store, and it's called Mobile Family Tree. Not only can you view data about people and families on that application, but you can also see some graphical views of how the people are related as well. MacFamily Tree also integrates well with iPhoto, so when you're selecting photos to insert into a record within MacFamily Tree, you can actually navigate your albums within iPhoto. There are several things I don't like about MacFamily Tree. The first and easiest is that it's got bugs in it. It's just not as solid as the other 2 major applications for Mac genealogy. It showed a person who was unrelated to another, but had been married to her father as an aunt to this person when she had no relation whatsoever. On one diagram, it even showed my living grandmother as deceased. Another troubling thing is that dates are not automatically formatted when they're entered. So if I'm typing along and I put a date in whatever format, it doesn't put it in the standard format that you've selected within MacFamily Tree. You can change the formats, but it has to be done through a maintenance menu, and it does all through your database instead of doing it as you type. So MacFamily Tree is a very promising application. It's, as I said, it's gorgeous. It's got some issues. You definitely should see it. The application costs $49 US for a new copy of it, and they do have a competitive upgrade. So if you have paid for a different genealogy application and you do want to move to MacFamily Tree, you can get 25% off of that new price. And you can get all that information again at cinium.de. I'm Ben Sayer, the Mac Genealogist, and you can find my how-to videos at MacGenealogist.com.
This next gem comes to us from our friend James Mowat over at the History Zine podcast. Jim does a terrific job of covering British history in his podcast, and he also has a great sense of humor. I'm really happy to have him as a contributor to the Genealogy Gems podcast, and today he's put together another fun linguistic bit, as he calls them. This time he explores the origins of a word that made its way from Europe to England and on to the New World.
Yankee Doodle came to town riding on a pony, stuck a feather in his hat and called it macaroni. So, which word do you think I'm going to pick out of that for my linguistic history trivia bit? Well, you probably guessed. It's macaroni. It's such a very strange word to be in there. I mean, I suspect many of our listeners will probably already know about this because I think I've heard children's programs from the United States that have talked about this song and talked about the origins of macaroni. But for all you others, I'll talk about it a little here. The name macaroni has an Italian connection, as you might guess. It came from people who'd been on the Grand Tour, and it became fashionable in the 1770s to refer to something that was Italian in style as very macaroni. Now, there was a group of people in the 1770s, very fashionable fops, who would wear really over-the-top fashions, large buttons, huge posies of flowers, high-heeled shoes with great big buckles on them, and a small hat perched on the side of the head. As you can imagine, these people very quickly became a figure of fun to the media. And to give you a flavour of this, I'll read you a quote from a book called Georgina by Amanda Foreman. It says, "The term macaroni was coined to describe the fashionable young fops of the 1770s. The term probably originated in the 1760s, when members of the short-lived Macaroni Club brought attention to themselves by their predilection for all things foreign, especially food. Macaronis were much criticised in the press. The Oxford magazine complained, 'There is indeed a kind of animal, neither male nor female, thing of neuter gender, lately started up among us. It is called a macaroni. It talks without meaning, it smiles without pleasure, it eats without appetite, it rides without exercise, and it wenches without passion.'" A delightful description there. So there you are, a macaroni, a fashionable thought from the 1770s. And just to go back to that little song I was attempting to sing at the beginning, that's obviously a dig at people from the American colonies trying to give themselves airs and graces, but looking ridiculous. The colonists actually reclaimed that song and made it their own. And now if you listen to the song, it's full of references to George Washington and his armies. So there you are. In short, a macaroni is a 1770s fop wearing bizarre and over-the-top fashions.
Okay, Genealogy Gems listeners, do you know what time it is? That's right, it's time to play Name That Tune. As you'll remember last episode, which was episode 53, I told you that I had recently inherited a reel-to-reel tape that was recorded in the 1960s by my husband's grandfather and grandmother Cooke. And I played this first of several songs for you on that episode. And a listener from Illinois called in on the voicemail line the next day after I published that episode with the following message.
Hi, the song you're trying to identify in your podcast is the Missouri Waltz, which is an old song but adopted by the state of Missouri as their official state song in the late 1940s.
And indeed, she was right. I went to the Library of Congress American Memory website, where I know that they have a ton of old sheet music, and sure enough, I was able to download and print the sheet music for the song. The song is entitled Hush-a-Bye, My Baby, with a subtitle of The Missouri Waltz. The lyrics were by J.R. Shannon, and the music was from an original melody procured by John Valentine Appel and arranged by Frederick Knight Logan. Another astute listener, Phil Hayes, wrote in to say that many folks associate the song with President Harry Truman, who was from Missouri, even though he really wasn't fond of the piece. Phil's mom, who is an 83-year-old active music teacher, easily identified the song. Written in 1914, the song, as Phil points out, might be considered politically incorrect or offensive to some, but it remains the state song of Missouri. He says because of that fact, the words have been changed many times over, and there are more than 20 different versions in iTunes alone. Everyone from Johnny Cash,
hush, bye, my baby, go to sleep on daddy's knee, journey,
to Lawrence Welk, the Fontaine sisters doing a harmonizing 1940s version, to the Six Fat Dutchmen doing a polka style. And of course, there's even a band called Bunny Grunt that has recorded it. Yes, Bunny Grunt, and I have no idea who they are.
Way down in Missouri, where I heard this melody, when I was a little child on my mother's knee, the old folks were humming, their banjos were strumming.
So, needless to say, you guys were just amazing at unlocking this little musical mystery for me. So in this episode, I'm going to play another song in the hopes that you'll be able to do it for me again. So here we go. Mystery song number 2. Name that tune. If you think you know the name of that song, please email me at genealogygems@gmail.com. Or better yet, call and leave the answer on the voicemail line at 925-272-4021. We've come to the close of another episode of the Genealogy Gems podcast. If you enjoy this free show, and I really hope that you do, there's an easy way for you to help me to bring it to you. If you decide to do some shopping online on sites like Amazon.com, which seems to carry just about everything you could ever want, just go to genealogygems.tv first and use the Amazon search box or go to Amazon through any of the links on the website. Amazon will then give the Genealogy Gems podcast credit for your purchases. It doesn't cost you anything more, but by using the links on our website, you do a lot to help keep the free Genealogy Gems podcast coming to you. Thank you so much for keeping that in mind this holiday season. And I hope that you'll visit the Genealogy Gems YouTube channel, where you can watch lots of great genealogy-themed videos at youtube.com/user/genealogygems. And I'll have a link to that for you in the show notes. As always, there's lots of ways to contact me. You can email me at genealogygemspodcast@gmail.com. I love hearing from you. I read all your emails and I'll respond to any questions that you have. Or you can visit me at Facebook. And you can catch up on what's going on in the world of genealogy at the Genealogy Gems news blog at genealogygemspodcast.blogspot.com. So until next time, thanks so much for listening, friend, and I'll talk to you soon.